Today, my guest is Colin Gunn.
They looked at the child from an evolutionary perspective, that really it was just a child's mind was like a machine. You know, you put this in and you'll get this out. And of course we know, I'm a homeschooler, so we know the purpose in our homeschooling isn't primarily that just giving them information, it's raising them in the faith and shepherding their heart. And that's what's not happening in the public school system.
Jesus, we can stand in the darkest hour, living with one foot in heaven, ready when he calls our name. For believers to live is Christ, to die is only gain.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today, my guest is Colin Gunn. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you have a documentary called Indoctri-Nation, Public Schools and the Decline of Christianity in America. And you have a whole lot of guests on there who have spoken, yes?
Well, when we make a documentary, our desire is to go and interview the experts. I'm not the expert, I'm a filmmaker. We go find the people that know all about a subject, and including the eyewitnesses, those that can testify to really what's going on. And so when we talk about the public schools, we wanted to find people that were in the public schools. So we have stories from teachers and school principals. We even have a man who was Teacher of the Year in New York City and New York State who talks about the public school system from an insider perspective. So that's what we did. We went on the road and travelled around America in a big yellow school bus, myself and my 7 children and my wife, and we just wanted to know what is education like in America within the public schools, and we have all the answers in this film.
Okay, now you are an American.
Yes, I'm an American citizen now, but I'm originally from Scotland. And so I met my wife in New York and then ended up coming over to America, and I've been here for 12 years.
I wanted to establish that so that people realize that this is not someone from another country looking at our country. This is a fellow American looking
Absolutely,
at our country.
I'm very much the American, but I think it does help to have an outsider perspective in a sense, because one of the first things you notice when you come to America are the big yellow buses. You know, these, and you don't have those in Scotland, you don't have them in many countries, but here you see it, and it's a symbol of what the public schools are. Coast to coast, we have this one organised system that represents what education is meant to be for most people in America, including Christians. The majority of Christians are still using the public schools to educate their children.
Okay, now why is that a problem?
Well, it's a significant problem, and we trace it back to the 1800s when they established compulsory education in America. And we show that many of the people that established that compulsory education system had an anti-Christian perspective. They were utopians. They didn't believe in the former Christian ways of education, which was to bring children to maturity and understanding. They had a new vision for culture and life, and that involved separating children from their parents, because the parents had the old ideas, the old Christian ideas, but they were utopianists. They wanted a modern culture which involved, to a large extent, the exclusion of Christian values. And so when we look at the schools now and we're shocked about Columbine and all the horrible culture within the schools, we can look back at the 1800s and say, well, it actually started back then with a lot of the progressives back in the day. Dewey is a good example of someone who was a humanist who really took control of the education system. But not only that, you have Darwin, you have Marx, and you have all these philosophers in the 1800s that really influenced what we get taught in our schools today. Yeah.
And yet, our founding fathers, when they talked about the importance of education, they wanted the Bible to be taught in schools. In fact, the Congress printed a Bible that was to be distributed in the United States because they said that our government, well, it was Adams who said our government was for a moral and religious people.
Absolutely, and so there was many people that disagreed with that in the 1800s. They wanted they felt that Christianity was going to hold America back. And so when you look at guys like Robert Owen, who actually came over from Scotland and established New Harmony over here, established New Lanark, near where I used to live in Scotland, came over here and established New Harmony, and that was a utopian town, and of course central to that was this education system. And so that idea caught on with Horace Mann, who looked at the Prussian model and borrowed that from Europe and brought it over here with a very strict regimented style of schooling, age segregation. And then the psychologists came along, Freud and G. Stanley Hall, and the problem with them is they looked at the child in a different manner as a Christian would. They looked at the child from an evolutionary perspective. that really it was just a child's mind was like a machine. You put this in and you'll get this out. And of course, we know, I'm a homeschooler, so we know the purpose in our homeschooling isn't primarily that just giving them information, it's raising them in the faith and shepherding their heart. And that's what's not happening in the public school system. So we're trying to warn people, look at the public school system, and it's a very costly thing. The most valuable thing you'll ever have is your children. And don't trust them to anyone unless you're really sure that they're reliable. And I think a lot of people are deceived about the public schools. They love their kids, and that's the sad part of it. They love their kids, but they're being duped in a sense. And so what we're trying to do with Indoctri-Nation, both this DVD and the book that's coming out, we're trying to inform people about what really goes on in the public schools.
Now, the book, will it have the same title, Indoctri-Nation?
Yes, it's going to have the same title. And what the reason for the book is there's only so much you can say in a film.
Yes.
And it's an hour, 40 minutes long, and it's a fun film to watch. We're on the road and all the rest of it, but we can only put so much in there. But the book is expansive, and a lot of the people in the film, including the teachers, have written chapters for the book. So the book is a great companion to the DVD. If you watch the DVD, you'll enjoy it, but you'll be led to want to know more, and all that information is in the book.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, one of the things that has led a lot of people to homeschool is the lack of God being allowed in the schools. Another is the age segregation. That really isn't even natural.
No, it isn't.
There's no other time in your life when you're only with people who are your exact same age.
I know, it's so peculiar when you think about it, and we should think of public schools as they are, as being peculiar. We tend to take them for granted and think of them being the way to do them because we were all brought up in that culture. But when you step back and look at the history of them, there's lots of weird philosophies going in there and why they do things the way they do them. And when you age segregate, it really, the worst thing for a child is to be around other children his age, because that you want to be pushing them ahead. The best thing for a child is to be around adults or children that are older than them or children younger than them that they can take care of. And that's the natural order of things in our homes. And so the schools don't follow that. They follow an evolutionary model, which comes from the 1800s, that children learned appropriately according to their age, and you should always segregate them from the other people, or you'll spoil the whole progress of their learning. And we all know that doesn't.
I really think that it was more to make it easier on them.
So that's definitely true. So you had the industrial revolution during the 1800s, and so a lot of it was about management and making things in a larger scale. And so the schools went that direction. And if you look at the giant schools now, we went from one-room schoolhouses where everyone was in the room together, learning, and also learning a lot better and learning how to read. And now we have these big factory machine schools where you go from class to class, and it's regimented, it's very expensive. And even people who aren't Christians are looking at that and saying, this isn't working anymore. And so they're looking for alternatives. And we really expose a lot of the faults with the public school system. But particularly, one of the hard stories is the Columbine story. We deal with that. We have a father in here who talks about his experience. He's a father of one of the Columbine victims. And he talks about something that's very important, which is his accountability. He says that the murderers were responsible for his son's death, but at some point he was still accountable for sending his child to a public school, knowing that they believed in evolution, knowing that they believed all these bad things, and ultimately Columbine wasn't acting out on the things that they were learning. They just took it to its natural conclusion. If you're going to teach survival of the fittest consistently for years and years, don't be surprised when people act on it and do awful things.
That makes perfect sense. Wow. Well, another thing that is unnatural in public schools and even in the Christian schools, unless they have a different model, is that everybody is going to learn the same subjects at the same level every year. Like, I remember being in second grade, and we picked up our books the night before we started school, and I had read through all the second grade readers that night. And the next day the teacher said, now don't read ahead in the readers. And so the whole rest of the year I was trying to be careful so that she couldn't tell I had read ahead in the readers. Well, obviously second grade reading was way too low for me because I could read all of the readers in one night. And yet, I wasn't as strong in other areas. So homeschooling gives you the opportunity. I mean, your child can be in 8th grade math and
Right.
4th grade reading and
There's
6th grade science.
There's
and-
an amazing amount of flexibility in our lives. You know, we don't we get up and we feel like if we've been up late, we will sleep late. You know, there's not this, you know, artificiality and regimented approach. And so when people over to homeschooling, the first part is you're protecting your child. Take your kids out of the public schools. That's what we want people to do. But we can talk about the merits of homeschooling as well. We don't do that in the film, but personally I think it's a great thing, and it gives the children a life that kind of I wish I had when I was young.
Yeah.
You know, my boys can run around a lot more. You know, I remember sitting in a classroom, you know, the sun streaming in through the window, looking out and wanting to be outside. And the life of a person in the public schools is very different than I think the life they could have, where they follow their interests. My daughter is 12 and reads all the time, but she has, you know, she reads for 4 hours in an afternoon, which she can do. That's fine. There's no let's stop doing that now and follow your peers where they're at. With you know, she really has a lot of flexibility in her education.
Now, I know that not everyone can homeschool. Parents might both work, but you know, sometimes we can look at things and really, if we look at our finances, it might be possible for only one to work.
Yeah.
Especially if we're seeking first God's kingdom and His righteousness, He is going to take care of our needs.
That's right.
And so we need to make sure that we're following Him in that. But then there's some who are ill, like my sister, like I told you about, who had cancer and she had to stop homeschooling. And then there are people who have Christian schools or other, I can't remember what those other schools are called.
Well, charter schools or parochial
thank
schools,
you.
yes.
Yes, or parochial schools, especially when there's parental involvement. But the main thing I think it's important for parents to realize is that God gave the job of education of the children to the parents.
That's right.
Not to schools, not to churches. It's our job. It's our ultimate responsibility. And I think it's good that you're pointing that out.
Yeah. Well, that's our main theme. We're saying don't abdicate on this issue. You'll regret it. You know, you've got your children are with you for a short time.
17 years, 18 years.
Absolutely, and
That's
it's going to fly by. I mean, my daughter's 12, our oldest is 12, and it's just flown by. I can't believe it. And so I'm happy that she's been with me. I work at home as well, so I have that privilege too. But we're allowed to spend a lot of time together, and it's just fantastic. And so we see that a lot of parents they're following the world's pattern. You know, the lifestyle. The 2 incomes is a necessary thing in people's minds. Homeschoolers are not the wealthiest people in the world, in case you haven't noticed. And so it's not as though it's just a white middle-class privileged thing to be a homeschooler. Most of it comes through sacrifice. And so it is attainable. There'll be situations where it's almost impossible or impossible to do it in any real sense. But there's help that's there, and people, if they get the idea of what homeschooling is, and what we tell people if they find it very difficult, you know, the single mom, for example, we tell people don't worry about the academics. The main purpose is the bond that you build with your son or daughter, and working on that, and shepherding their hearts, and not the academics will come second to that. And so our critique of American education, we do talk about the academics because there's significant academic failure in the public schools, but the main point is, you know, you're responsible as a parent to guard your child's heart, to keep them unspotted from the world. And in a public school these days, it is impossible to do that. And so we're saying, you know, consider an alternative.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, we have to educate the whole child. We are preparing them for whatever God has planned for them to do with their lives. And if we just hand them over to people who don't believe the way we do for however many hours a day they spend in school now, and I've heard they want to increase that to the hours and the days.
That's right.
How can they possibly learn what they need to learn from God's Word and from us if most of their time is spent in an ungodly environment where God is not welcome, or watching television, or playing video games,
right.
and you know, all these things that are coming from a secular culture. It needs to be coming from us in God's Word.
And I think the myth that people have bought into is that the public schools are somehow neutral. And we know as Christians that they're not. And we outline instances where they're clearly not. They're antagonistic towards Christianity. And we have a valedictorian giving a speech in the film who starts to mention the name of Christ, and her microphone gets cut. And we have, kids who give out Christmas pencils and things like that. All these stories of people who try to be salt and light. Their children are trying to be salt and light in some ways. And from the top down, from the Department of Education down, and the philosophy filters all the way down to the teacher in the classroom, there is an anti-Christian spirit, and Christians are persecuted there. And the solution to that is avoidance. I mean, we recommend, we're not saying go change the schools, because I think, we've seen people try and fix the schools, and we say, well, you don't have time to go do that. If you've got a child who's going into school right now, you can't get elected to the board and change things and fix all the bad books and all the lies that come up in the curriculum. But you have an option if you can take your kids out of public schools and protect them.
Well, the other thing is, while we're trying to make those things happen, are we willing to make our children the guinea pigs?
Absolutely, yeah. It's
I'm
too
sorry.
big a risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one daughter, and she was in public school for 1 year and 3/4, and then I homeschooled after that.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
No, I was not willing to let her be.
Well, they'll be like their peers, and however you run your home, whatever is going on in culture, because all these kids have access to their cell phones, to the internet. So whatever you don't like in culture, you cannot protect your child from it. It's just impossible in the public schools, because it's the lowest common denominator, peer pressure, where the worst kid will influence in the largest way. And that's what happens in these schools. And a lot of Christians who just love their kids, they're surprised that their kids are learning this or acting like this. Well, it's really just because that's the time. The values in the public schools are largely set not by the teaching staff, but by the peers.
Yes. Yeah, and then they're surprised that so many children who are brought up in church leave their faith when they become teenagers or when they get into college.
That's right. So their children are leaving the church. And we believe that's sort of the end result of us not doing what we should be doing in terms of their education, is instructing them, when you wake up in the morning, when you walk, and when you spend time with them, this whole principle.
Which the Bible tells us to do.
Absolutely. So we're told that the education isn't just something you sit them down in a corner and give them a book. Education is about their life integrating with yours, and them learning what it means to be mature, to be a grown-up, to be responsible, to treat others well, to follow the Christian worldview, and be a Christian in ethics and morals and practice. So that's the stuff that they learn. They can't learn that at public schools. It's literally banned in public schools to teach the Bible. We've got examples of a teacher who was fired for just naming the name of Christ, and he would have been allowed back in the classroom if he agreed just to not name Christ's name. And of course, we know that you can't do that as a Christian. And so,
but they will have other things in there. They'll teach transcendental meditation.
They've got everything,
things like
everything
that.
else. So they've got Islamic training, and they've got
everything but Christianity.
Because they see that as the biggest threat. So it goes back to this 1800s. How do you change culture towards a utopian vision with a progressive world? They have to get these old ideas out. So separating the children away and trying to train them away from the parents.
And then you get to the idea that the children belong to the state, which we're in danger of reaching that here in America.
I think that's where we've gone already with the assumption that the state, when you submit your children to any public school, they're open to the CPS, Planned Parenthood will be there as well. There's all these groups that are just waiting for your child to join that school, and they have their claws firmly on your child's heart at a very early age. They start to influence you, and they'll do values clarification, which means they'll start to take your child and question your child. They'll act like they're not being dogmatic, but they'll say, some people believe in homosexual marriage, and then some people don't. What do you think? And they'll present it in a way that will make the child, who will have been taught some moral things from the age of 1 to 5, start to question it, and they'll start to question their parents' authority.
It's a conditioning process.
That's right. And so the authority becomes the school rather than the family. And what we're saying is we want the hearts of children in America to turn back to their family and not the state. The state is not the appropriate. God has not commissioned the state in Scripture. It's for it's for punishment
for
of
the law,
wrongdoing. It's for law. But
yeah.
the parents have been commissioned with it, and it's a simple biblical principle, and we need to turn back to that.
Absolutely. Well, where can people find you online, and where will they be able to find the book?
Well, they can get the book through New Leaf Press, and they can get this DVD at Indoctri-Nationmovie.com.
Okay. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
very
being
much.
my guest.
My pleasure.
For